Good morning. I'm Lieutenant Jeff Kramer with the El Paso County Sheriff's Office. I'd like to welcome each of you to the Office of the Sheriff. It's nice to see such a good gathering. Obviously a very important topic to be discussed this morning, the Black Forest Fire After Action Report, which of course in its entirety will be available for you immediately following the conclusion of the press conference. What's important to note is I recognize that there's interest in other things that have been in the media. That's not what we're here to discuss, and therefore we'll ask that any questions that are asked at the conclusion of the presentation are limited in scope as well and relate specifically to the Black Forest Fire After Action Report, the status or update on the investigative work that's being done on the Black Forest Fire, and the presentation that you're about to hear. Just a couple housekeeping notes. We do have some tables up here towards the front of the room with several binders. Those binders have been used obviously not only to create the Black Forest Fire After Action Report, but also the investigative binders are also included just to give some visual reference for the amount of work that's gone into that investigative effort, and I'm sure that all of you are looking forward to hearing an update as far as the status of the investigation. Again, the presentation that you'll hear certainly is not all-inclusive of the After Action Report, just kind of a summary or some highlights of that particular report. And again, that is available to you upon conclusion of the press conference, really in two manners. One, we have hard copies available for you on a circle table, in the back of the room on the right side, and then also it will be available on our website as well shortly following the conclusion of the press conference, and that website of course is epcsheriff.com. So we'll about get ready to get started as far as the presentation is concerned, and again I'll ask at the conclusion, remind you once again that questions need to be limited in scope to simply the Black Forest Fire and the After Action Report. So without further ado, I'll introduce the Sheriff of El Paso County, Terry Makita.
Thank you, Jeff. Looks like I don't have a lot of room to put my stuff here. It's no surprise that today is really the eve of what began 1 year ago tomorrow. We felt it was appropriate to bring the community kind of up to speed to the progress we've made, and the first step in that is going through the After Action Report. Now, we're not going to cover every detail of that report. As Jeff said, we'll have those reports available, but my intent is just to cover some of the highlights that are contained in there and talk about some of the lessons learned and some of the things we've done already proactively to prepare ourselves for the next disaster, hoping that we do not have one. I'm going to do my best to give an update as to the investigation of the cause of that fire as well, but it is still an open investigation. We believe it is coming to a close. At least our part of the closure is at a point where we can turn it over to the District Attorney's Office and let the District Attorney comb through the volumes of evidence that have been collected and determine if there is any criminal culpability. So I won't be able to go into a lot of detail, but I'll do my best just to bring you and the community up to date as to where we are at this point. As we all know, the fire began on June 11th, and the first call into our dispatch center was at 1:42 p.m. We also know by fact that 2 people lost their lives, Mark and Robin Hoklitz. We know that the estimated cost of the response, which is still finally being finalized, was $9.8 million. We know that 133 510 gallons of retardant were used in an effort to try to control this fire. We know that 866,000 gallons of water were dumped in an effort to extinguish this fire. As I've mentioned before, there's a person in the audience who actually donated a lot of that water that was dumped, as well as other private members and community members who had water supplies and gave permission, and I don't want them to not be acknowledged for what they contributed in the firefighting effort. There were 151 flight hours recorded by fixed wing and rotor wing aircraft. And I want to comment on the fixed wing and rotor wing because there had been policies in place that prohibit rotor-winged helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft from sharing airspace over a small area. When we're talking about Black Forest, in general, that is a highly dense area, and this is the first event that I'm aware of where that regulation was removed. I believe it came from the governor of Colorado to give us that flexibility to allow the fixed wing and the helicopters to share the same airspace. And for those of you that were on site watching it, it was quite a scene to see so many aircraft in such a congested area, and it certainly illustrates the level of competency and professionalism by the air traffic control, by the coordinators, by the ground crew, to make sure that those missions could be carried out in a very safe manner. Some more facts. We know that residents lost were 489. We had 1 cell tower damaged, 8 detached garages destroyed, 31 damaged. And you can see the other statistics up there. 14,000 acres burned. And then you can see the number of the population that was affected. One of the things about Black Forest that was very different than Waldo Canyon, and there's been a lot of comparisons made, is Black Forest is a forest. And within that forest and all the natural growth that occurs, you had homes, and those homes could range from cabins that were built as summer getaways in the early 1900s to million-dollar homes in well-developed, well-mitigated areas. And so it was very diverse, but it is truly an urban wildland interface area at its greatest, meaning that it was rich with fuels. Those fuels had very low moisture content, not just from the heat of that month, but years of drought affecting the area, which set the conditions for what we'd like to refer to as a perfect storm. The fire did reach 100% containment on June 20th. I want to talk a minute about the collaborations that took place, and I think this is a success. The level of cooperation and collaboration was with the military, whether it be the Colorado National Guard, Fort Carson, Cheyenne Mountain Air Station, Peterson Air Force Base, Colorado Springs Fire and Police Departments, and the hundreds of other responding personnel, was probably one of the finest efforts that I've witnessed, especially from the military. And I think one of the things that we saw that was much different than what we witnessed with Waldo, and it was because of actions that have taken place at the federal level and at the hands of Congress, was we were able to access aircraft, military aircraft, under the National Guard as well as under the Fort Carson immediately. And that was a huge, huge asset to us, and it was the first time we had witnessed that. In the past, we had a process we had to go through which usually took somewhere between 48 and 72 hours to get the wheels up off the ground and that aircraft airborne. This time, it was a matter of hours of cutting through the process. So I need to compliment our legislators at the federal level, the senators that worked very hard for when Waldo Canyon concluded, to make sure that those resources were made very readily available. The response of the Colorado National Guard was phenomenal. Colonel Utterback, I mean, within hours, told me he would have 120 of his troops on scene, and he delivered. He was able to relieve our sworn deputies and CSPD officers and all the other agencies off those roadblocks so that those deputies and police officers could begin rescue missions and searches for people that were unaccounted for. That was a huge asset, and Colonel Utterback and his folks maintained perimeter security for many days, and I just do not think that the level of cooperation could have been any better than it was from that group of people. We applied the lessons learned from the Waldo Canyon fire and had a quick mobilization of resources. I mean, early on in the fire, as we were still in the process of delegating it from the district to the sheriff, immediately to the state, the Type 1 team, which we've all come to know, the Great Basin Type 1 team with Rich Harvey as their incident commander, was already notified, making arrangements to travel his team out here and begin putting their infrastructure in place. I felt one of our strengths was the public information, feeding the public with as much real-time information as we could, especially to those people that thought they could have lost their home or did lose their home. We took a risk and we began doing assessments immediately of those homes, knowing that there would be a potential degree of error, but we felt that the majority would be better served than the minority of errors that we may run into. The other strength was having the Type 1 team, Rich Harvey's team, come in knowing we had worked with him and his people a year before. There was very little discussion of whose responsibilities would fall under who. We had already worked together. We personally knew one another. We knew what was expected of each other, and that made for a very seamless transition from the Type 3 team that the state had put in place to the Type 1 team. And it was just phenomenal, and the working relationship between myself and the other firefighters and responders, it was absolutely probably the best it could be. I'm not sure we could look for any areas of improvement in that transition and the sharing of responsibilities with that Type 1 team. As I said, we began a home assessment. That was a lesson learned from the Waldo Canyon. I watched citizens who really wanted answers, not knowing, or even some of them knew that they had lost their home. And so our goal was to send a team of people out at night when the fire was the least likely to blow up and it was safest for those deputies to go in. And sometimes it consisted of 18 deputies driving through areas where street signs and references to addresses did not exist. They had been consumed by the fire. And sometimes just looking at slabs or debris that illustrated there may have been a home there, and trying to log that in to feed information to the families and those who may have lost their home. I think that those deputies and the staff that put that information together and made it available to the public did a phenomenal job, and it also laid out the plan for the next event, if there ever is one. Members of the investigations division engaged early. I know there was a lot of talk that days passed. The fire was burning, obviously, in the area on the 11th, moved very quickly into the evening, moving west. Our preliminary investigation began on the 12th, and it was a full-scale investigation with multi-agencies by the 13th, and they were on scene all day long, well beyond 10 or 12 hours. Initial taskings included checking various homes where there were concerns about the welfare of residents, and the collection of evidence to immediately begin the investigation to determine what caused this devastating fire. One of the biggest challenges we face on any kind of an event like this is communication between all the responders. There's been efforts at the state level that I say we as in the Sheriff's Office, have been actively engaged in to try to come up with a dedicated frequency, a zone for a statewide response. When you have individuals coming from Boulder, Larkspur, Canyon City, Montrose, coming to offer aid and support, and we're operating off different radio systems or different frequencies, it makes communication very difficult. We even struggled for a while to provide the Guard troops, the Colorado National Guard troops, with radio so that they could communicate with our patrol deputies, because citizens were approaching them at stops and trying to feed that information into the deputies. That's one area that I think we're much better positioned this year to respond, and I've notified Colonel Letterback that we now have 75 radios in reserve for responders that come into our community so that they can maintain those open lines of communication. Another area of concern is when an event begins, you never really know the magnitude of it. You can imagine it's going to get much worse, but oftentimes in Waldo, as well as in the Black Forest fire, what you think is the worst is an understatement of how bad it can really get. And every incident I've been on is a little chaotic in the beginning. It takes time to organize, to get an understanding of the magnitude of the event. And under the NIMS, you've heard a lot of terms of the National Incident Management System or the Incident Command System. It takes time to get those pieces in place and bring the structure and organization. We're taking steps toward trying to improve that, knowing that every event is probably going to start out chaotic. And as that event itself becomes more out of control, it's going to take longer for us to gain control of our command structure so that we can begin an organized assault on it. But I think each fire we go through, we get much better at it. I know we had a better response to the Black Forest than we did the Waldo Canyon. And I know the fire we recently had out east just a couple weeks ago, it was a phenomenal response. It was well organized, and that's through exercises and tabletops and lessons learned from the events that we have faced in the last year. One point of contention was the incident command structure during the Black Forest fire, and I think it was printed in a couple of the papers that not only I was under the impression that we would be operating under a unified command, Chief Harvey, based on my comments, understood we'd be operating under a unified command. The confusion came in when Chief Harvey delegated the fire to the sheriff's office and I immediately delegated it to the state. It was the state that decided they wanted a single incident command. Once that fire is delegated to them, they get to make that choice. Our policies, the fire districts we work with, we are all operating under the policy that we will function under a unified command, and we have had to change our policies and work with those fire districts to recognize that once we delegate it, that authority may decide a different structure is more conducive to the resources they're bringing in. And that created some confusion. And those are some of the things that we're working with. We're already adjusting our policies to make them more flexible and working with the fire districts. Now, one question that has come up many times over is how is the relationship with the Black Forest Fire District and the Sheriff's Office progressing? They have a new board. I've already been in contact with some of their board members, and I intend to make sure that regardless of what has transpired in the past, that we continue to serve the citizens. And if that means that I'm up standing next to their fire chief, working with him under a unified command, that we will make the best decisions we can to protect life and property. Anything else is set aside, and it's about doing our job and serving the citizens. One of the things we recognize, we almost had law enforcement, especially our deputies, injured or put at high risk because they did not have the appropriate safety clothing for the second year in a row. They were going in and performing rescue. They were performing searches for possible missing persons. Immediately after the Black Forest incident came to a conclusion and we started assessing our strengths and weaknesses, the first thing we did was buy some protective breathing apparatus for every patrol deputy, as well as Nomex clothing so that they could perform those duties safely and not be overcome by smoke or have their clothes burn as they're trying to perform their duties. We also felt that we should have done more in-depth debriefings at the end of each shift. That information sharing of fire behavior, of areas that were searched, of what activity we were looking for, both from the fire responders as well as from the law enforcement. So that's something that we've identified that we plan to move forward with and ensure that those debriefings take place and that information is shared on a broader scale than what it was. Debriefings did occur, but in retrospect, we felt a lot more information could have been shared. The air and ground resources needed to respond were phenomenal, as I said. One of the areas that we feel we lacked in was the reconnaissance. The actual eyes up in the sky telling us the different directions and movements of the fire. If you listen to the radio transmission, you know there was a wall of fire moving directly east, almost in a northeast pattern. It curved to the southeast at times, but there was also fingers of it moving directly north due to the winds and the changing winds. The information we were getting from the people on the ground really couldn't see and accurately assess the fire movement because they were looking through heavy smoke, they were looking through burned debris, but we felt that stronger intelligence, information from reconnaissance would have been much more helpful. I do again want to applaud the pilots and the folks flying the helicopters in the fixed wings, and they have issues to work through. The ground control did a phenomenal job, but the National Guard assets and the Forestry Service and the military have different protocols on their communication and their policies of how they fly and how they attack a fire. They are actively working through those when it becomes an issue affecting a civilian population, where they can somehow find an agreement to get on the same level of communication and each offer a little flexibility in their policies, but that is something that they are working out. We know, and it's been widely broadcast, that water supply cisterns had not been advertised. Responders weren't told about them. Our staff didn't know about them for resupply. Those are things that we're already moving through to identify for the future, where there are cisterns for firefighting capabilities, where there may be hydrants, and what equipment it would take to extract that water to resupply the people in the field that are fighting the fire. We also feel that search and rescue and our special communications unit, which are volunteers, were certainly underutilized, and that's another training issue that we began incorporating in and getting those people that we're going to expect to support us, whether it's search and rescue, whether it's our radio communications team, get them the proper certification so that they can go in the field and they're trained to where they can keep themselves safe and help us conduct the searches that need to be conducted. As I said, we've purchased the safety equipment for our patrol deputies. That equipment is kept in their vehicle and assigned to them personally. We continue to explore opportunities to utilize volunteers in the event, and we've partnered with so many groups already, the Pikes Peak United Way, 211, Colorado Springs, and El Paso County, to train additional volunteers to work in not only the Joint Information Center, but in the field areas, running simple supplies like water and food to those units that are out engaged in the firefighting efforts. And I'll step aside for just 1 minute to really applaud the numerous volunteer organizations. I mean, I've talked about the first responders, I talked about the city of Colorado Springs, but the Salvation Army and groups that came from other states to make sure that everybody engaged in this effort was fed, was hydrated, had the care they needed, here also to take care of the families that were displaced, the county of El Paso stepping up and using their resources from IT and DHS and the health department to do air quality samples to keep everybody as informed as they could, just did a phenomenal effort. We are also looking at some type of a regional EOC, Emergency Operations Center software, where we can better track resources, what those resources are and what they're engaged in. That will give us more intelligence into knowing what their capabilities are and better coordinating relief as well as running supplies to those individuals, even if it's something as simple as a brush truck making sure that the water supply is replenished. We plan to move forward in a very aggressive fashion to develop better lines of communication and cooperation with all fire districts throughout El Paso County, as well as modify our dispatching process to better aid them in tracking their resources. And they are working with our dispatch center now. Many policies and protocols have been changed that better suit their ability to respond and track their own equipment once it is dispatched. Again, I talked about us reviewing our ICS policies and building in more flexibility and more so the understanding of all the fire districts as those policies are amended to gain that flexibility, that they have an understanding and a buy-in to those changes and why those changes are required. I talked already about the unified command. That's what we have embraced. That's how we approached the Waldo Canyon fire. It was a unified command until the Type 1 team came in, And even though they were in command of the fire, the Type 1, Rich Harvey, we still operated under a unified command. But we have to recognize that when the state decides to take over and they are paying the bills, and I shouldn't say when they decide to take over, when they're delegated the authority to run the incident and they are paying the bill, it is their authority to decide which command structure they want. I think as a result of this, there'll be ongoing discussions about the roles and whether we should stick with a unified command and under what circumstances. Maybe we should deviate from a unified to a single command, but those are all training issues that we're working through and agreements that we're going to continue to explore. Talk a little bit about the investigation. The Sheriff's Office has pretty much concluded its investigation. We had months where we were waiting for certain materials to be analyzed. Preliminarily, it was analyzed by the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, ATF. They gave us some preliminary indications and suggested we send it to the FBI for further analysis. We have received those reports and analysis back. It was nothing to show one way or the other to clarify any points that we were trying to, but that is completed. The fire behavior analysis is completed. All the autopsies have been completed, and we are just now waiting to finish up the last few supplements, organize the case, and then get the U.S. Forestry Service's finalized report. They gave us a preliminary report, but they have a process where it has to go through a review, a peer review at the U.S. Forestry Service level. Once that is done, that'll be included in our investigation, and that investigation will be carried over to the District Attorney's Office for determination whether there is criminal culpability. One of the big questions that has come up lately is, are we prepared and capable to handle another disaster, whether it's a fire or a flood? And my response is this office has never been as prepared as it is today. Through the funding of 1A, we've increased our staffing in our Emergency Operations Center. We've added planners to it. We've been able to buy the equipment that we have long needed, not only for the deputies to be able to go out and perform rescue missions or search missions, but also the firefighters. Our capability has grown with our wildland fire team from 35 to 60 members now. And that was obviously seen with the last fire out east, where we were able to send 2 teams, 2 vehicles out to respond and assist that fire district, while we still maintained a full team at our fire base right over here on Cimarron, prepared to respond to back up or support the unit out east, or respond west if something began or a fire started there. We have better equipment and we have better trained personnel, and we have more of them. I have no doubt that our staff and our employees are ready and capable to respond and be more proactive based on the lessons learned from Black Forest, and I expect nothing but a professional, immediate response with very capable people. Again, I want to express my appreciation to the thousands of citizens that came forward to offer assistance, to the non-governmental organizations that were there to support us, ones that are often forgotten like the animal rescue folks, the volunteers that were going in during the heat of the fire rescuing horses and cattle and any other animals that they could save, whether it be a cat or not. There were numerous acts of heroism from the deputies responding in there and putting themselves in jeopardy, as well as the police officers. I want to thank the Colorado Springs Police Department, the Fountain Police Department, the UCCS Police Department, the Monument Police Department, because if it wasn't for all their efforts and the sacrifice they gave, we would not have been able to maintain the perimeter security as well as the active patrolling within the burn area to protect the property that still existed from being vandalized or those victims of the fire being re-victimized through acts of crime. We had very few criminal incidents occurring within that area, and in a couple cases we were able to make arrests on those that did, but in comparison to what was witnessed in the Mountain Shadows area, I felt that a big contributing factor was all of those law enforcement agencies cutting loose resources from their jurisdiction to go in and help protect the residents in the unincorporated area. So I want to express my appreciation to them. I will talk as much as I can, which is not very much, about the fire. Again, we're waiting on one final report from the U.S. Forest Service, but there are things we can absolutely preliminarily eliminate. And it's no surprise that lightning has been excluded, smoking has been excluded, campfire as the cause has been excluded, a railroad has been excluded, children playing in the area or possibly being the cause, that has been excluded. And then a category that the U.S. Forestry Service has as miscellaneous has been excluded. Until we get their final report, I don't think I can offer much more than that, other than between the U.S. Forest Service with 3 independent experts, the Colorado Bureau of Investigations, and ATF have all determined the area of ignition to be one and the same, which essentially means we know exactly where the fire began. I don't know that we'll ever have a concrete source of ignition, but I know a lot of people have worked very hard, and I think knowing where the point of ignition actually was gives us a tremendous start to try to determine that. I think is what we'll end up with is cases of probability, some being low and some being very high. And I can't comment any further until the district attorney has the opportunity for them to review the case and determine whether there is any criminal culpability or potential criminal charges. That concludes my comments at this point. I know we have copies of our after-action report. Our after-action report primarily focuses on the initial response, the actual response to the event, and I know that El Paso County is working and has done a phenomenal job managing the recovery aspect of this, and they will also be offering up their after-action report as far as the role and responsibilities they played. I do want to compliment County Information Services, the County IT Department. They were on the scene within hours trying to determine and making requests of ways they could support us and get us the technology and the access to GIS and everything else that we may need for this, right down to printing maps so that responders coming in from out of town would at least have a reference to find their way around the Black Forest area when they were deployed. So the county was a phenomenal resource to us. They were an asset. And as we transitioned from response to an event, we became a support element to the county as they began the transition into the recovery of the event. We continue to provide support. We continue to monitor weather conditions because of the flooding that's occurred in the Highway 24 corridor, as well as the flooding that may occur up in the Black Forest area. And with that, if anybody has any questions related to the Black Forest fire, I'll try to answer them. Yeah.
So you said that it was chaotic in the beginning and it takes time to get pieces in place. In the past, you criticized Chief Harvey for the way he handled the initial hours of the fire. So now, have you kind of changed your tune about his handling, or are you still have some questions about it?
No, I still have questions. My comment, chaotic, may not have been as specific. When you have an incident occur, and in the initial calls, if you listen to the dispatch tapes, they weren't even sure where the fire was. Once it was determined where it was, you had agencies responding that the coordination and communication wasn't how it should have been, to where they were actually being commanded and sent to where they should have been, so that we knew where they were. It took hours after the fire was delegated to the Type 3 team to determine what resources were there, what they were engaged in, and what they had. And in any event, you need to establish that command and control. You need to announce who the incident commander is, and that incident commander needs to have a resource that is tracking who is responding, have them sign in, check what equipment they have, and then deploy that equipment in an organized manner. Now, when I said it was chaotic, most major events that erupt very quickly, that is very common, where you're not sure where all your resources are. but there are steps to try to mitigate that and minimize that.
And you don't feel like those steps were taken?
No. I mean, that's clearly been proven in all the communication that was heard. And I'm not saying that to criticize, I'm saying that we still have a long ways to go, and we learn from each of these incidents, and every incident we do get better.
Sheriff, I have to ask, I know you said you don't want any questions about this, but do you believe the current scandal surrounding your office is going to go away?
Yeah, eventually it's going to go away. There's going to be an investigation, and when that investigation is complete, there's going to be a lot of facts shared.
What do you say to the response? What do you say to the call of the El Paso County Commission calling for your resignation?
You know, we're here to talk about a disaster that took place in this county, and the citizens deserve the answers to that. The citizens will get the answers when this independent investigation that I fully support is completed.
You said the sheriff's office part of the investigation is complete. You're just waiting on that one report.
Yes.
There's some stuff that's been confiscated by your office from people who live near where the fire was started. When will they start getting their stuff back that has been ruled out as potentially involved?
Once the district attorney has reviewed the case, really it comes down to the DA releasing that evidence once they've had an opportunity to review the investigation. And I would say once it is reviewed, then those individuals, their properties will be released, especially if it does not look like it's directly related.
Sheriff, you said the response for Black Forest Fire was better than Waldo. Can you give any specifics?
Well, number one, the aircraft was an obvious one. Waldo, it took time to get the C-130s up in the air. We had some light helicopters. We were competing with other interests. It took, I think, 72 hours or just over that to really get the heavy tankers over the area that was inaccessible by foot to try to slow that fire down. That was a major change. I think the flow of information to the public was much better in the Black Forest, and it's not to criticize what took place in Waldo Canyon, but to show that we learned lessons from that. We listened to the citizens, and we made adjustments and took the risk of knowing that we could possibly put out information that may not be 100% accurate, but that it would be a very low level of inaccuracy.
Sheriff, we talked about the areas of concern, areas for improvement. For a matter of perspective, do you think those areas of concern led to further loss of property? Were they obstacles to that degree in your mind?
Say that again.
The areas of concern, areas for improvement, did they end up costing houses? Were they that much of a hindrance?
You know, you're asking broadly the areas of concern. I can't say that they did cost more houses or they didn't. What we're dealing with is a fire that very quickly got up into the treetops. It gained energy, it gained intensity in the heat, and it moved very rapidly in multiple directions. And once a fire is in the trees and it's running across the tops of those trees, there's very little you can do but try to move people out of the way. I saw houses, to give you an idea of the intensity of the heat that was generated, that were reduced to ash. Twisted beams, steel I-beams, that were melted and looked like somebody just took them and folded them up like a pretzel. That's how intense the heat is, and as that fire is moving across, it is actually sucking the air right up out to fuel it to where there's very little air content and almost imploding some of those houses.
Sheriff, I covered the fire down here. I'm from Denver. My name's David Young, for the record, and I admired your handling of this incident down here, and I understand what it is to this community, and lives are lost, and it's a huge. But in all due respect, a lot of people want to know the answer. Are you thinking about resigning or having any apology in terms of what's going on in your office as we hear it from Denver?
As I've said, I am staying here until this investigation is completed. There's a lot of facts that are going to come out after this independent investigation is completed, and I think the community deserves to hear those facts before any more judgments, executions, or determinations of guilt are made.
But Sheriff, look, there's ample evidence that you're having a sexual.
Are there any other questions pertaining to the Black Forest fire?
Really? You're going to cut me off?
Yeah.
Judy, go ahead.
Judy Von Allfeld, Black Forest News. I understand that the investigation that Chief Harvey did on the place the fire started, the physical place, and that some insurance agencies looked at and other experts may be different from yours. Can you tell me, you have to tell me where, but I'd like to know if that is common to both reports or if yours is different than that?
We've worked and interviewed the insurance investigators. We do have a copy of what Chief Harvey represented as his investigation. His investigation is one theory, but the evidence does not support that theory. I think once the insurance investigators have an opportunity to see our investigation, it's going to answer a lot of questions that they have not had access of information to.
So it's two different sides?
No, I think my take is, and the briefings I've had from my staff is, that the insurance investigators are anxious to see our side. They have not had access to it since it's an ongoing, potentially criminal investigation. But I don't think what they realize and what they see is that far off from what we have.
But my question is, are they different properties?
Different
owners? I don't know what you know, okay?
That's what the investigators are saying.
I do know that the Balch property is implicated by virtue of the fact that the personal belongings to various people haven't been returned, okay? I don't know exactly where the other one was, but I don't think it was that property based on the conversations I've had. So I'm just trying to find out if there's more than one possible site.
Well, I know what Chief Harvey's side of it is, and I'm comfortable to a point based on the interaction of my investigators, the Forest Service investigators, interacting with the insurance investigators, that we are real close in the final determination. And once the DA reviews it, then they will have access to the information that you don't have access to, and I think that they will most likely agree with what we have uncovered.
Sheriff, what do you say to people that would say all you're doing right now with this press conference is deflecting away from your own controversies?
You know, I would say they're trying to make excuses because I held a very similar press conference last year to bring the community up to date as to where we were in the after action on the Waldo Canyon. And it's appropriate now that our after action is completed, our investigation is completed, and we're on the 1-year anniversary of a very destructive fire. People can say what they want and twist what they want, but this report is something that had to go out to the community, and I think it'd be a disservice to not stand up here and give them the information that I can give them, that I have, and that is ready to be released.
Sheriff, do we know why evacuations were delayed from Black Forest? I know at least our station was giving evacuations a few hours before we got word from the Sheriff's Office.
The evacuations started as soon as Scott Campbell, I think, did the first one before he was even on scene. Started carving out what he referred to as I think a polygon. And then it's up to dispatch to build that polygon and then start sending those out. Chief Harvey was the incident commander and is responsible based on his assessment of it to begin the evacuations before any of my staff even showed up. So once my Deputy Fire Marshal was en route, he made the first call for aerial support and he began evacuations. The only evacuation I'm aware of that Chief Harvey directed was, it was brought to his attention there was a bunch of children up in one of the neighborhoods up there, and he directed somebody to go ahead and move all those children out. I don't remember what they were there for, but it's in one of the reports. That's it.
Their community center, and they were having a kind of a function.
Yeah, there was a function.
I drove past them at about 20 minutes after 2.
Okay.
Last question.
No idea.
Given the fact that there's still 2/3 of the Black Forest area is very unhealthy forest, what is maybe the top 1 or 2 things that you're going to take out of what you learned from this report to ensure that not as many homes get burned if this were to happen again up there, not as many acres burned? And second part to that question, with the lessons learned, things that you guys know you need to improve, what types of challenges will the recent distractions within your office provide as you move forward and try to address these things?
That's like 3 questions for one last question. You know, the county, we're working real closely with the county as the recovery. They are the lead agency in the recovery. I know they send out weekly updates. I know that they have taken down any trees that posed a threat, but the rebuilding of the trees up there is going to take 20, 30 years at least. Some say 50 years. The county, as the regulatory authority, will be looking at those things such as fire codes, working with the fire districts, and we'll continue doing what we have been doing for as long as I've been sheriff, and that's engaging in mitigation as much as we can. We have increased resources over what we had last year. We have brought on additional staff for the summer fire season, and if they're not fighting fires, mitigation is the key to saving properties on many of these fronts. And we'll continue those efforts. I think the county...
AmeriCorps, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, we bring AmeriCorps in every year. They've been in here, but also we hired part-time seasonal firefighters to supplement so that we have them on standby and ready to go at any time. But the county really will be looking at the recovery of the Black Forest area as well as any hazards that may exist and the rebuilding process. And what was the last part of your question?
Just given the recent distractions that have been going on within your office, what challenges is that going to bring in addressing some of these things that you know you need to improve based on this report?
We have 786 employees in this office, and every day, every one of them is coming to work and doing their job. The distractions that I'm responsible for have not in any way impacted their duties and responsibilities, right down to the preparation of the after-action report, the progress that continues to be made on the investigation, where now we're only waiting on the U.S. Forest Service, the civil deputies out still serving civil paperwork, the patrol deputies still out solving crimes, investigations still doing their job, our emergency operations center folks planning for every possible emergency that could come up and respond, and they've been very proactive with the recent rainstorms and engaged in the Highway 24 corridor. Every indicator that I see across this organization and the people I talk to, everybody is still engaged in doing their job, and that's why I'm absolutely confident that whether it's a robbery, a homicide, or a major event, that be a fire or a flood, our office will respond better than it did at the last event.
Aren't you really short-staffed though? You're 3 less commanders than you had. Your undersheriff is out on sick leave right now.
My undersheriff is in this room somewhere.
She just left.
Oh, she just left? So what you read isn't always true. Yeah, I'm down 3 commanders, but I've been down that many on vacation. It's a paramilitary organization, and when one person's position is vacant, another slides in and takes over. It has no bearing on the line level doing their job. Our staff are very well trained and very capable.
Thanks, everybody. We appreciate your attendance.